states, all cutting higher education, the amount of money being taken out of higher education is many, many times larger than everything Obama proposed, assuming he gets it through. You would have to therefore understand that Mr. Obama's proposals are a small effort to offset a small part of what's unfolding in the state and the city levels. In California alone, one state, Jerry Brown, the governor, 2 weeks ago announced he's cutting the budget of the state public higher education system by $1.5 billion in one state, just in 1 year. You multiply that by all the other states that are doing the same thing, way more involved than anything Obama proposed and anything Obama can get through. So the crisis at the state and city levels is very severe. It's going to also impact all of you, because it means, as is happening everywhere, police departments are shrinking in the United States. Fire departments are shrinking. Health services are shrinking. Social work departments are shrinking. People in offices are shrinking. You think you have a hard time getting public service at the motor vehicle department now? You just wait. Those people are going to be more surly, more unhappy, more overworked and underpaid, and more likely to take it out on you than they have been, because it's a condition that is absurd. The president also didn't make the fairly obvious point. If the cities and states are cutting back, it means they're cutting back on employees, public employees. They're firing them. They're laying them off. Let me make sure we all get that. We're in an economy that's having a problem. It's an economy that's having a problem because it has high unemployment. So what we're doing is laying off public employees, which makes unemployment worse. When someone who's in trouble decides to respond by shooting themselves in the foot, we consider that person needs help. A lot of help. This is a society that is doing two interesting things to deal with its crisis. It's laying off public employees. Strange. That makes unemployment worse. It means that the quality and quantity of public services delivered to the American people is shrinking. When? During a crisis, when they need more, not less of it. And finally, a lot of the cuts are concentrated in public higher education. What is it that's going to make the United States succeed in the world economy in the years ahead? The quality of its labor force. And where is that determined? In the public higher education system of the United States. So what are we cutting? In order to deal with our current crisis, we are shooting ourselves in the foot in terms of our future capacity as an economy to compete in a world where our competitiveness is nothing to boast about already. Very strange way of dealing. And I want to talk about another aspect of public employees that ought to be talked about. And for this, I want to bring to your attention some issues very quickly. Okay, first, public employees are a little bit different from private employees in the United States. Not in the ways you might think. The average income of a public employee is about the same as a private employee. They do not make more money than private employees, taken as a whole. So in case you hear about the public employees have such a wonderful thing, no. Their salaries are more or less the same. They do have somewhat better benefits than people in the private sector. So there's a bit of a difference there. Not a huge difference, but a difference. But here are the things I would like to focus your attention on. Public employees are different from private employees in one, and actually two or three dimensions. One, they're much more unionized. The private sector in the United States, the percentage of workers who are in a union is 6.9%. Official government data, Bureau of Labor Statistics. 93.1% of private employees in the United States are not members of a union and are not represented by a union. 6.9% are. In contrast, public employees have a roughly 33% unionization. So there's no contest. Public employees have unions. Of course, the majority don't. Just about a third do. The other 2/3 of public employees don't. But there's a difference. Which means, of course, that if we're going through a wave of laying off public employees, we are disproportionately hurting unionized workers who will be unable to pay union dues, who will be weakening their unions as a result. So this is an assault on the remaining strong part of the labor movement. Number 2, public employees are about 19% African American. They're a much higher percentage of that labor force than they are in the population as a whole. So to go after the public employees will disproportionately affect African American families who will lose jobs at a percentage rate higher than their percentage in the population. Here's a statistic you may not have known. 1 out of 7 veterans in the United States work for the government. So if you lay off public employees, you're sticking it to the veterans. Unionized workers, veterans, African Americans. What else? Public employees work longer, stay in the job longer than private. And they're older than, on the average, older age. So to attack the public employees is to attack unionized, minority, older, longer workers who are likely to have been soldiers for the United States. It's a charming choice of who to take it out on when you have an economic crisis, and tells you something about a society that does that and has no qualms about it at all. Here's the most common way of building the case for attacking state and local workers. And it's the most common everywhere in the world. So when you think it might apply to your country, stop and remember it's universal. Here's how it goes. The people in the government are lazy. The people in the government don't work hard. The people in the government just sit there all day playing with their little electronic gizmos. And they have very big pensions, which they abusively make larger than they were even supposed to be, etc., etc., etc. They do nothing. And they deserve to be kind of brought back down to reality. Those people who traded with a collection of nice stories. The story of the firefighter who is now retired and earning $304,000 of his health benefit, and then we get photos of him in the newspaper carrying lumber up and down on his retirement, so his back is obviously okay. Are there people who game the system? Absolutely. Does this include public employees? Absolutely. Is it limited to public employees? Hardly. When I was in Greece last summer, I was amazed to encounter the number of people, even left-wing people in Greece, who fell for the exact same arguments there. They would tell me, you know, here in Greece it's a scandal. The public employees, they don't do anything, they steal the money. The same story. It's the same story. It reminded me of a friend of mine who wrote a dissertation at Yale University in the English department years ago. And here's what his dissertation. He compared the stereotype of black Americans held by white Southerners. Compare that, the image of watermelon, chicken, the whole game. He compared it to the stereotypic image British people had about the Irish.
Oh, yeah.
And as he went through, it was identical. The Irish were sexual athletes of extraordinary prowess. And they ate this and they dressed this way. Down the line, it was the same. It was a wonderful lesson that none of this has anything to do with white, black, skin color. This is a need for a culture that is squeezed in a certain way to find a scapegoat, to define something other than themselves, and heap everything they're frightened about onto those other people as if they were characteristics of those people rather than things that were fearful for them inside. This argument about public employees is a way to get the mass of workers basically to be split. The private worker should think that it's appropriate to stick the public worker because they've gotten away with murder. And so they become part of the discourse of who to cut. What public employee to get rid of? We don't need those people in the post office. They don't do anything. Oh, good. So now you become part of the effort to make this economic system work better by sticking it to another group of workers. Okay. Let me turn then to the topic, before opening it up, that is not an update but an analysis of something. And this has to do with the other side that no one is discussing. The question of getting revenue. Could the United States solve its economic crisis by having the government throw tons of money into the economy? Let's assume that has to be done. And that's a reasonable assumption, because the private sector isn't doing it. The private sector is not hiring people. The private sector is not investing. The private sector is not growing. The private sector is not doing much, and so we have an economy that isn't going anywhere, which is why the government comes in a massive way. Actually, before I do the taxes, let me make one more comment about the government coming in a massive way that allows me to talk about the budget Obama proposed yesterday. Let's do the simplest arithmetic. Obama proposed yesterday a budget in which the United States government is going to spend in the coming fiscal year $3.7 trillion. And the government is going to take in about $2.2 trillion in taxes. Okay? So the difference between what the government has to spend to keep the economy going and the money coming in is $1.5 trillion. That's the deficit plan. That's roughly what the deficit is now. Why does the government have to do that? Because it has to keep the economy going. Because this is an economy that is completely dependent on the government shoring it up. For those of you that know a little bit about economics, this is what Keynes advocated. When the economy doesn't work, the government should come in and spend like crazy. Deficits don't matter, borrow whatever it takes, keep the economy going because you're the only thing holding it back from. And I've already given you those statistics. 98% of all mortgages written in the last 2 years are either owned by or guaranteed by the federal government. Had the federal government not either offered to buy the mortgage, but what that means is your bank gives you a mortgage, and the minute you sign that you owe them X dollars to pay over 20 years, they take that piece of paper and they sell it to the government. The government owns the mortgages. Okay? The government either buys the mortgage or it guarantees to the bank, don't worry, if the Smith family can't pay you back, we the government will make it good for you. So without that, there would have been no mortgages. The private sector wouldn't touch them. No mortgages, no houses. You think the price of your house has gone down? If the government weren't there backing it up, you know, you couldn't give your house away. There are many parts of the United States where you can't give your house away now. I mean it literally. You can't. There's no one to take it.